Welcome to the Easier Way to Sell presentation of Close the Deal Without Selling. Here's your host and developer of the Easier Way to Sell, Ike Krieger.
Hey, this is Ike Krieger. Welcome back. We have got a jam-packed episode for you today. I want to cover first is why you should be ditching your pitch, and we're going to be covering an interesting topic. It's based on the question, are you hearing, are you listening to, are you acting upon things that really haven't been said? Then we're going to move to a couple segments about internal dialogue, and we're finishing up with a conversation about networking as a marketing strategy. So enjoy. I shared some similar thoughts with you about 25 episodes ago, and I thought it was a good time to go back over those thoughts and even discuss why this podcast exists in the first place. As the name of the podcast implies, what we talk about here is sales. But why are you listening? You already know how to sell. You invested in a Learn to Sell course, or you were taught how to sell on the job. But there's an inherent problem with your traditional Learn to Sell training. Your prospect took the same course 3 years ago. Your prospect knows what a traditional sales pitch sounds like. They've read the same sales books you have. They've listened to the same how-to recordings you have. And they don't like being sold to any more than you do. But even with all of this training, you still end up facing these challenges more than you expected. You give a great presentation, but they still don't buy. You get tired of all the stalls or objections. You have a hard time discovering your prospect's real needs. You have a real difficulty uncovering budgets. And in many cases, you find yourself presenting to people who can only say no. Now, if any or all of the above are difficult for you to swallow, you may have to adjust your vision of selling altogether. But you've been brainwashed to think about selling in one specific way, and that way still might make you queasy. You've been trained to believe that your ability to present and persuade tops the list of your most valuable selling skills. But here's why that's not true. You do show and tell. And show and tell hasn't changed since you were a kid. You talked, others listened, and when you were done, maybe you answered a couple of questions. Most people who sell for a living don't give their prospects an opportunity to talk, because most people who sell believe that talking is selling. That's how you sell. You do show and tell. You talk about your product, your service, or your company, and the prospect listens. Now, don't get me wrong. In some sales scenarios, a presentation is the only way to communicate with your available prospects. I remember being with Jenny as we walked through the Los Angeles Convention Center at a trade show, and we stopped to listen to a guy selling pots and pans to the crowd. Now, he wasn't concerned with having authentic conversations with each person in his audience because he was looking for multiple purchases off his pitch. In this case, I can certainly understand a show and tell format for selling. In this sales scenario, show and tell is really the best way to put your product or service into the hands of your buyer. And as a side note, his pitch was pretty effective, as was evidenced by Jenny and I coming home on the subway with boxes and bags filled with pots and pans. But imagine that convention center technique being used on someone across the table from you as you're trying to discover their financial or other needs addressed by your business. You want to have a conversation, and in that conversation, you will ask your prospects a series of open-ended diagnostic questions, and they will take over the responsibility of telling you why they need your product or service. Imagine how much less critical your ability to present and persuade would be if your prospect took over those responsibilities willingly. Over the past 50 years, I've been viewing and working with people who sell for a living. And what I've noticed is that most salespeople don't give their prospects an opportunity to talk because most people who sell believe that talking is selling. That's how you sell. You do show and tell. It's time to get rid of show and tell. You talk about your product, your service, or your company, and the prospect listens. How has that been working for you? Remember, your job is to get information, not give it. So, I'm urging you to ditch your pitch. I'm urging you to stop giving a sales presentation. Your job is to get information, not give it. And you get information by asking the same type of diagnostic questions a doctor would ask. Understanding the power and value of effective questioning is key. Effective questioning is probably the single most important factor in achieving business success. Successful communication in business, negotiations, sales, or in everyday life is the result of having an authentic conversation in which you ask the right kind of questions. The way you learn about what people need or don't need is to ask open-ended interview-style questions and then listen carefully to their answers. That's it. That's the secret of this sales model. Ask the right open-ended questions and listen to the answer. But being an effective interviewer and asking the right questions isn't so easy. Nobody taught you how to effectively get information. You weren't taught this skill in school or your sales training class. You were trained to be good at show and tell. You weren't trained to interview prospects and listen. You were trained to respond. You were trained to talk, not listen. Well, you can continue with show and tell selling, or you can learn how to conduct a unique sales interview that will allow you to examine, diagnose, prescribe, and get buy-in just like a doctor. And just like a doctor, you'll learn how to get information, not give it. You'll learn a new way to ask questions and gather information that will help you close the deal without selling. What's the first step? Ditch your pitch. Let me ask you this. Do you listen and respond to what is not said? Because we all have a tendency to give extra meaning to the comments made by others. When a client looks at your agreement and says, "I see that you have an arbitration clause in here," many of us have a tendency to explain or justify the arbitration clause. What was not said or asked was, "Could you please explain or justify the inclusion of an arbitration clause?" The response, if any, which could be made to the prospect's observation is, "Yes, we do. I'm curious what caused you to single out that specific clause." Pay attention to what is not said or asked and avoid unnecessary answers, explanations, or justifications. You'll save yourself a lot of grief. The most important and valuable communication skill is listening. Remember that you hear with your ears, but you listen with your brain. Multiple studies have verified that words make up only 7% of all communications effectiveness because words are purely symbolic, and symbolism is personalized and subjective. Now, there may be a broad spectrum of general comparison and understanding when someone uses words, but when it comes time to move below the surface of meaning, the symbolism of most words varies from human to human. We took a look at that when we talked about the stand exercise. Language is merely an external display of an internal response to neurological stimulus. In plain English, your words mean what you say and you think they mean. Other people will get or not get what you say based on their interpretation of those same identical words. But what you're faced with is the possibility that there will be no accurate interpretation of your communication and therefore no desired or predictable response. You think that what you say means what you think it means. And the good news is that's absolutely true a very small portion of the time. What you say means what other people think it means. The meaning of the communication is the response that you get, and as I mentioned earlier, words are the least effective form of human-to-human communication. And let's say for a moment that's true, that means that what most of us need is an ever-present English-to-English interpreter or whatever language is your first language. Or you can become that interpreter yourself. You can listen for the symbolism. You can listen to the language. You can exercise your empathy and interpret effectively. But you need to use your active listening skills because people rarely mean exactly what they say, and you very rarely interpret their words or messages very clearly. What's happened is they've deleted certain information from their communication that's necessary for the receiver of that information to move closer to a true understanding. So let's define deletions. Deletions are what a person leaves out of their communication, either unintentionally or intentionally. Here's an example of a deletion in action. You're sitting in a room with a friend at your home and they say, "I'm uncomfortable." You respond to them by saying, "I'm cold too. I'll turn up the thermostat." How could you possibly know that the temperature control in the room was what was making your friend uncomfortable? Yet the first thing you did was make an assumption and raise the temperature in the room. The person doing the listening assumed that the person doing the talking was uncomfortable about the temperature. However, the reason for the uncomfortability is an unknown. It was deleted from the communication and produced an assumption on the part of the listener. You, as an active listener, have the ability to retrieve the deletion and clarify. With that recovery, you can come as close as possible to understanding the actual meaning of the message being transmitted. The first step to recovering deletions is asking questions. Your first spoken response to your friend's uncomfortability could have uncovered the deletion by asking one or two of the following questions. You're uncomfortable about what? You're uncomfortable about who? That will retrieve the deletion. If they say, "I'm cold," you can then turn up the thermostat. But what if you ask the question about what or about who they say they're uncomfortable with, and they answer, "I think your mother is listening at the door"? That opens up a whole new conversation about that person's uncomfortability. Human beings are hardwired in such a way that they can't help but delete certain thoughts or images from their internal and external communications process. A study of deletions found that a normally wired human being has the capacity to hold in their brain 7 thoughts, images, feelings, or ideas, plus or minus 2 at any given moment. My experience leads me to believe that the number closer to reality is that you can hold 2 thoughts, images, or feelings at any given time, plus or minus 2. Plus or minus 2, that's all. You're thinking about what you're thinking about. But I'll bet you weren't thinking about your left earlobe. And now you are. What got pushed out of your mental pipeline? Can you remember what you were thinking of when I mentioned your left earlobe? Probably not. What causes you to respond the way you do? What causes others to respond the way they do? You need to listen and ask clarifying questions. People really want to be listened to and understood. As a matter of fact, Family Services of America did a study and found that the number one complaint among married couples is, "My spouse doesn't listen to me." In general, the biggest complaint of humans is, "Nobody listens to me and nobody really understands me." Being listened to and being understood is so important that there's a multi-billion-dollar industry that's been developed in this country and countries around the world to do virtually nothing more than listen and recover deletions. Of course, I'm referring to psychotherapy. Here's a great story between messages sent and messages received. A beautiful woman comes up to a man in the bar and says, I'll do anything you want for $100, but you have to write it down in no more than 3 words. And he goes, fine. Takes out a piece of paper, writes down the 3 words, and hands it to her, and she looks at it and it reads, paint my house. Nearly 2,500 years ago, Sanskrit poet Bhagavad Gita wrote, man is made by his belief. As he believes, so he is. In other words, you may be killing a lot of your sales with your internal dialogue and language. Here's a little story. I had a client who sold Jaguar automobiles. He was having a tough time meeting his own sales expectations, let alone the expectations of his sales manager. It was suggested by his manager that he come and see me for coaching. After a few minutes of conversation, I asked this question. You seem talented and smart. What's preventing you from selling more Jaguars? His reply was immediate. They're just too damn expensive. Too expensive for whom, was my follow-up. They're just too expensive, he repeated. Have you sold any Jaguars yet, I asked. He said, sure. I asked him, so why did the people who bought a Jaguar buy it if it was so expensive? As he replied, his eyes lit up, and he got it. They weren't expensive to them. His own internal dialogue was killing most of his deals, and I reminded him, just because you believe something is true, that doesn't make it true. It just makes it true for you. So my question to you is, what internal dialogue do you have about your product or service that might be sneaking out and killing your sales? Let's examine for a moment how your internal dialogue deals with gratitude. How grateful are you for what it is that you have, for what you've accomplished, and all of your capabilities? I wrote the following poem in 1998 as a response to someone asking me, what exactly do I have to be grateful for? There was a man who prayed to God for more. He asked for things to be better, to be different. Soon calamity befell this man. Whether by God's will or by destiny, this man soon had nothing. He cursed God for forsaking him. He asked God to help him. He begged God for guidance. When God did not reply through word or deed, the man knew that he needed to be for himself or for no one. The man took upon himself the tasks of doing that which he had to do to have what such a person as he himself could produce. It was not long before the man once again had that which in the beginning had been insufficient. Only this time the man got down on his knees, began to cry, and proceeded to thank God. Let's stick with the conversation of internal dialogue for another moment, and I'm going to read you something that was written by the famous author Unknown. When the other fellow takes a long time, he's slow. But when I take a long time, I'm thorough. When the other fellow doesn't do it, he is lazy. But when I don't do it, I'm too busy. When the other fellow does something without being told, he's overstepped his bounds. But when I do it, that's initiative. When the other fellow takes a stand, he's bullheaded. But when I do it, I'm being firm. When the other fellow overlooks a rule of etiquette, he's rude. But when I skip a few rules, I'm original. When the other fellow pleases the boss, he's polishing brass. But when I please the boss, that's cooperation. When the other fellow gets ahead, he's getting the breaks. But when I manage to get ahead, it's hard work. Your internal dialogue, please listen to it. Okay, pop quiz. All you have to do is answer true or false. 1, you're motivated to build your business and your profitability. 2, you want to strengthen the potential for generating referrals to your business. Now, if you answered true to both of the above, then organizational networking may provide you with the powerful business development option you're seeking. Organizational networking comes in all shapes and sizes. The spectrum runs from civic groups such as the Rotary Club to business organizations such as Chambers of Commerce and to lead generation groups such as BNI. And if you're new to networking, you may want to investigate your possible options by attending a networking function put on by these types of groups as a guest. You'll get a good feel for the networking style of both the members and the organization itself. Okay, you've made your choice. You've decided to use networking as a business development tool. What are you getting yourself into? You're getting yourself involved in a process where relationship building comes first and business building follows. In some ways, networking is more like dating than you might imagine. Is your outcome to create a relationship or a short-term transaction? Okay, you're ready to jump in the deep end and attend a networking function, and you're all set to make the most of every opportunity. So, you gather your business cards and your other handouts. You practice your introductory elevator speech. You get in your car. You drive to the networking function. You enter the function and you begin to follow your predetermined networking plan. What is your networking plan? Whether you network to promote your business, get referrals, or build a database for marketing, you must have a plan. So, what is your networking plan and is it written out? You may ask, why do I need a plan for networking? After all, the only thing I want to do is basically schmooze. Now, for those of you who don't know, schmooze is a technical term for friendly communication between two or more people. And the all I want to do is schmooze mindset is in keeping with a sales strategy based on, I'll just go into the appointment and see what happens. Effective networking and effective selling will certainly include some schmoozing. However, if your networking plan consists of schmoozing alone, you may be setting yourself up for a disappointment. Networking is all about establishing and maintaining relationships that foster trust and friendship. People buy from people that they like and they trust. People send referrals to people that they like and trust. Now, giving referrals can be risky because people want to be sure about you before they introduce you into their circle of trusted sources. Those who are ready, willing, and able to provide these referral leads want to know that you can be counted upon and that you can be trusted to deliver as promised. Networking is about creating relationships that help establish an outside marketing force for you and your business. The trust that builds these relationships takes more than occasional involvement. Here's a couple networking conversation starters that go a long way in establishing that trust. Ask for advice from fellow networkers. Questions like, what's the best way to make the highest and best use of this organization? Or how has face-to-face networking with this group helped your business? Are a great way to start. When you hear someone's focus turn to trying to sell you something, just ask another open-ended question. Something like, hey, what you do seems pretty interesting. How did you get into this business? Questions take all of the pressure off of you in the early networking events and allow you to remain interested rather than interesting. Consistent networking success will not materialize if there's no well-defined strategy in place. Productive networking goes hand in hand with your overall marketing strategy. Are you promoting name recognition? Are you in the process of building a database, for example, of those who will receive your company newsletter? Are you seeking warm leads and referrals? How many per month and by when? Your strategy is clarified in your marketing plan. And a written business plan includes a marketing plan component. A well-written business plan contains the goals and fully researched projections for your business. It's against these goals and projections that you measure your business successes and shortcomings. I recommend that every business have a written business plan. And for those of you who've not yet gotten around to the task of developing a full business plan, you're not alone. However, the good news is you can create a business plan on a single sheet of paper in an hour or less. But for networking, decide on your strategy. Make the strategy simple. Decide on your networking goals. Make the goals accomplishable. Most of all, be consistent and participate as much as possible. But networking is about your business. If you just want to meet people, try computer dating. Either way, commit to your plan and follow it. And of course, you have to determine if your marketing strategy is in line with your brand strategy. You know how important I think that an effective brand strategy is to the success of your business, so remember to consider both your marketing and branding strategy simultaneously. Please keep in mind that an effective marketing strategy does not equate to a business quick fix. As with any marketing and advertising strategy, you must have patience. Organizational networking is most successful when you let your relationships develop and grow. Effective marketing is a process, not an outcome. And surprise, surprise, effective networking is a process, not an outcome. All right. That's enough for this episode. We covered a lot of material, but I'd like you to pay special attention to your internal dialogue in every aspect of your business. What are you saying? What are you telling yourself that makes it okay or not okay to do or say certain things? Take a close look at how you're communicating with yourself and realize that that may be what you have to master in advance of mastering communication with others. But if it's any solace, join the club. And of course, I'd appreciate it if you took the time to go to LinkedIn or Facebook and follow our page. That's Close the Deal Without Selling. But you know that by now. This is Krieger. See you next time.